C, E flat, F. Hey everyone, Metz here, or Guillaume Metz, and welcome to this new video. Now this video is very exciting to me because it's one of my favorite topics. We are going to talk about the concept of chord progression, and more specifically of the harmonization of scales / modes, which is the concept that is really at the heart, that is foundational when it comes to understanding chord progressions. This is something that is usually very interesting to guitarists. As we all know, a lot of us ask ourselves the question, what do I play over this? How do I know what key I'm in? How do I know what scale to use? What mode to use? Okay? Essentially, how do I make sense of a chord progression and make sense of this chord progression in a way that allows me to know what I should be playing? Is there a modulation? Is there a change of key? Really, what are my best options for improvisation or composition? Well, the good news, of course, is there is a logic to all this. There is a way to look at a chord progression and make sense of it and essentially say with confidence, yep, that's in C major, and therefore I know that if I want to play and not take too many risks, the C major scale is a good idea to start playing over this chord progression. And then the other good news is that when you know how to do this, you can then reverse engineer that process and essentially ask yourself, okay, well, how do I make a chord progression that is in the key of C major? Okay, maybe you came up with a little bit of a lick or a melody, noodling over with the C major scale, and you want to write a chord progression to it, and you don't even know where to start. Or maybe you know that C major would work, but you don't know which other chords would work in order to stay in the key of C major for that specific piece of music. That's something you can learn. So again, that video is perfect for those of you that are improvisers, that are finding themselves kind of confused in the middle of a chord progression and that would like to have answers, would like to understand and know, okay, how can I make sense of this to know what to play in this context? And then it's also for composers that would like a bank of ideas, of options, a place to start when you're trying to write chords to a melody or just to write a chord progression. Again, my goal here is to educate and empower guitarists or aspiring guitarists and help them become better players, improvisers, and or composers, mostly through a thorough and logical understanding of music theory and how it relates to the fretboard. I really believe in the power of knowledge and that having clarity of mind and understanding what you're doing gives you a lot of power and essentially will make you, in the end, a better musician and will make the art of making music more enjoyable to you. As you can see, I produce only long format YouTube videos. I don't produce any 5-minute little flashy things like learn all the scales you need in 5 seconds. This is the only chord progression you ever need. This is obviously wrong. I hope that everyone out there understands that this is definitely bait. It's impossible to learn one scale and then unlock everything there is to know about music. Learning music requires patience. It requires a lot of knowledge, sitting down, understanding, playing, of course, practicing. So I decided to make long format videos the way that I would actually teach my students and that I actually still do teach my students. So because those videos are long, of course, they are time-stamped. You don't have to watch the whole thing in one sitting. You can, look at a few chapters and then take a break. You can even just skip to the chapters that you think you might be interested in. But again, I believe also in humility when you're learning. There might be a bunch of little things here and there that are left unexplained in your knowledge of theory. You think you know perfectly, but maybe you don't entirely. So if you have the time, and if you're passionate about this, I recommend just watching the whole video. You might learn some cool things along the way. Understand, of course, that these videos do take a lot of work and they are free over here. So if you want to support me, there is a way to do it that is completely free, and that is simply to subscribe, to share, and to click the bell icon, and to give me a like on the video. Those things really, really help. I know you've heard it over and over again, but it takes 1 second. And if you do this and you appreciate the content, that's an extra encouragement for me to keep going with those videos. Okay, so let's give a little bit of context over here before we dive into the actual harmonization of a scale. Again, it's important to know these elements and to have kind of this background global vision of what's going on, because that's often the reason why people don't understand things. They want to go straight to the answer. I want to know the modes, but they don't understand all the other things that make that notion of mode interesting. Think about any piece of music that you're likely to encounter, likely to want to improvise over, likely to want to compose. What is a piece of music made of from a distance, right? Again, think simply. Most pieces of music can be decomposed as such. You have a melody, so the melody is usually the most forward aspect of a piece of music. It's higher often in pitch and or in volume. That melody is often played by a lead instrument or often a singer, right? The singer will also sing lyrics as they are singing the melody. So it's the place of main delivery of the musical message, essentially. That's why we put the lyrics on the level of the melody, not on the bass line, right? Because it's the most efficient way to deliver the message. Now again, it doesn't have to be a singer. It can be a lead guitarist. When you're playing a solo over a chord progression, you're essentially becoming the main melodist. And that's why we say that you're playing a solo. Nowadays, in most pieces of music, the melody is played over a chord, or even more often chords, which form what we call a chord progression. This context that the melodist is actually playing, we say playing over, again, because often the melodist is louder and also higher in pitch, is often referred to as the harmonic context. So you have a melody played over a chord, or often chords, which we'll see usually follow a specific logic and are linked together in what we call a chord progression. And then this whole thing is also happening within a rhythmic context, okay? That rhythmic context will include elements such as the tempo of the tune, the melody will follow specific rhythms, and the chords themselves will also usually follow a specific rhythm, which is what we call the harmonic rhythm. Now, why is this important? It's important because that's often the situation that you find yourself in as a guitarist. You're essentially landing in the middle of a harmonic context and a rhythmic context, right? There's a chord progression, there's a tune happening, and the question you ask yourself is, what do I play? So really what you're asking yourself is, are there things about the harmonic context, things about the chords and how they're linked together or not, and about the rhythm? Can I analyze these things so that when I take my guitar and start playing, I don't have to just muddle through by ear and make a bunch of mistakes, but so that instead you can at least have a good framework or starting point where you know, okay, I know that if I play this scale, it might not be the best at the beginning, I might have to just, to explore, of course, but I'm not going to play a horribly wrong note. Now, I can already hear some people, you'll see this all over the forums online, well, there are no rules, that's not true. You can't just, there is no right scale or wrong scale, there is no right notes or wrong notes. There are wrong notes. And because there are wrong notes, there are notes that are not so wrong, and there are notes that, again, sound right. Everybody will agree. You listen to someone playing this scale over this chord progression, and if they gave you a few options, most of the time people will agree and align on which scale works the best over this chord progression. So yes, there are right answers. And that doesn't mean that you can't use your ear and break these rules and go explore other things. Of course you can. But it's good to have a framework. That means that when you're improvising, you at least have one set of options over here, notes on the fretboard that you know will sound adequate, and you can fall back to that scale or mode or arpeggio, whatever it is, to efficiently and appropriately play over a chord progression. Okay, so rant over, let's get back into it. How do we know how to deal with specific harmonic contexts or chord progressions? Okay, well, the first thing is to place them into one of three main categories, because it turns out there are basically three main harmonic contexts. a tonal context, modal context, and the blues. A tonal context is your classic major or minor context. When you go, you open a tune or you go to YouTube on a backing track and it says, this tune is a pop funk tune in G major. In G major, okay? When you say in G major here, you're referring to a tonal context in the key of G major, all right? So tonal music really revolves around major or minor scales, major or minor keys. A modal context, on the other hand, is a context where you're more likely to be using modes. So not just the major and the minor scale, but other modes of these scales. Now, if you don't understand modes, that's okay. What I want you to see over here already is that there is a context that lends itself to the utilization of modes. So a lot of people try to learn all their modes, but they don't understand that these modes are pointless unless you know when to use them. Finally, you have the third context, which is the blues, okay? And specifically the major blues, because the minor blues is mostly, it's a tonal context. It falls back into the first category. But the major blues is a little bit of its own beast there, and it's definitely going to influence how you're going to play. So it is a context of its own. It should be pretty much treated independent. Now, the reason why we differentiate these three contexts is because, again, they are going to determine how you're going to think of your melodic tools, of your scales, etc., and what you're going to use to improvise over them. Now, despite those differences, these contexts actually have some common points. And the common points behind these three contexts is that there is a logic behind the chord progression. Essentially, it's not just random chords. These chords are connected, and they're connected usually using the harmonization of the scale of the mode that you're playing, which is what we're going to talk about in this video, of course. So a tonal context, a modal context, and even the blues follow a specific logic in the way that the chords are chosen to make these contexts, and therefore you can recognize this logic, and then you can choose what you're going to play adequately and appropriately. Now, a little bit of a warning over here. Of course, it's not just the chord progression that determines how or what you play. There are other considerations. For example, a stylistic consideration. Say I take the same chord progression, for example, C major, A minor, D minor, and G, okay? So, as we'll see, this chord progression is made of the chords of C major, and therefore, it is, the way it's built over here, makes it in C major. Now, however, if I'm, for example, seeing this chord progression and I'm at a rock jam, it's definitely going to change, well, for one, how I play the chords. I would probably play them more like this. And then when it comes to improvising over this, I'll usually use what is stylistically appropriate to rock. So mostly probably stick to my pentatonic scale, maybe a few elements of the major scale, right? But I'm not going to go into some crazy modes or play out or add too many chromaticism. So it sounds something like this. Now, on the other hand, if I'm in the style of jazz, that same chord progression, well, first of all, I'd probably play differently, something more like this. And then for my solo, I'd probably do something more like this. So as you can see in these two examples, there is definitely some stylistic differences. I'm playing differently in different things over here. But what's important is that my framework, meaning again, the scale that I'm thinking of as my main reference all over the fretboard, even though I'm, articulating things differently, the reference is the same. The framework is the same. I'm using C major in both cases. So again, does harmony and my knowledge of theory tell me everything I need to do? No. Okay? It's one thing to know that I should probably use the C major scale over this chord progression. That's already great, by the way. But it's not the end of the story. I need to also adapt to the style, and I need to, of course, develop other things. My technique, my ability to be stylistically appropriate, my ear, all these other things are, of course, really, really important. But it's still awesome to know that if there was one scale I should probably pick over this chord progression, C major is a good idea, all right? That's what we're talking about in this video. So how do you recognize these main three contexts? Well, luckily, there are ways to kind of at a glance, just looking at a chord progression, or just if somebody gives you a chord progression, for example, or even listening to a chord progression, right? There are ways to kind of know what you're dealing with from a distance. So here are the tips over here. Tonal contexts, which are again usually major or minor, they're based off the major or the minor scale. So that's of course the first clue. But when it comes to the chord progression, they usually tend to have a lot of chords. And what I mean by a lot is at least 3 chords, usually more than 3 different chords in the chord progression. And not only do they have different chords, but these chords switch from one to the next relatively rapidly. So there is what we call a fast harmonic rhythm. It's not like there is a chord for 8 bars and then another chord for 8 bars, etc. Right? There is, for example, a bar of C, a bar of A, a bar of F, etc. When you see such movement like this, the odds of you dealing with a tonal context, a piece that is based on a major or minor key, the odds are very high when you see this. Now, of course, it's not the end of the story. As we'll see, these chords also need to be connected, right? They need to be part of the harmonization of the same scale, which is what we're going to talk about. Now, again, it doesn't have to be a million chords. There's plenty of pop tunes, for example, that are tonal, and it's just 4 chords. But 4 chords that switch rapidly like this, chord 1 in the first bar, chord 2 in the second bar, etc., that's enough, again, to have a tonal context. Because like I said, it's 3 or more chords usually that switch relatively rapidly. Modal contexts are usually associated with very simple harmonic backgrounds or harmonic contexts. And what I mean by simple is usually one chord that's repeated over and over and over again. It's what we call a vamp. So if you see a vamp, one single chord that's played over and over again, something like this. This is usually indicative of a modal context. That's where you're probably going to be using modes. Which modes? That's the topic for another video, of course. But again, the modes you're going to choose over a progression like this will differ based on usually other things, not just the chord progression, but mostly stylistically, right? So if it's one single chord played over and over again, but you're playing over it's a funky kind of feel, you'll play certain modes. If it's a more like spacious, dark atmosphere with the same chord, you'll play other modes, some darker modes, etc. Right? So there's also a stylistic guidance, again, over here that will determine what you will play in each modal context. Again, topic for a next video, but I just wanted to give you a few little indications over here. And finally, there is the blues. Now, I said earlier again, specifically the major blues. So that's the blues that's not based or made of minor chords, but mostly made of 7 chords. It's the classic 1-4-5 chord progression. It's the 12-bar blues, okay? With, again, exclusively major or 7 chords. And the reason why, again, is because minor blues usually fall into the category of tonal music. They are tonal. But the major blues is its own thing. It's its own beast over here. And you have to know what to do and how to improvise over the blues. Now again, what these 3 main contexts have in common is that first, as we'll see, there is what we call the notion of center. These contexts are articulated around one note and usually one chord that is more important than the others, that is more emphasized than the other. That's what we call the home chord. It's that last chord that you hear at the end of a tune that just resolves and everything and sounds like the tune is completely finished and wrapped up, right? It's the note that is put forward musically as being more important than the others. All right, that's what we call the notion of tonic or center, and we'll talk about this a little further. But what these three different contexts also have in common is the fact that there is a logic behind the chords that they're made of. These chords are often part of what we call the harmonization of a scale or a mode. So for example, when you say I'm in C major, what does that mean? They are made of the notes of the C major scale, but combined in different order. And that's why the C major scale works over all of these chords. It's because even though they're not all C majors, they are made of the notes of that scale. So when you play the C major scale, none of the notes that you play, or for now at least, let's think of it this way, it's likely that the notes that you play are going to work because the chords you're playing over are made of the notes of this scale. So in general, harmonizing a scale or a mode, which were the purpose of this conversation here, we'll just think of a mode as a scale as well, because they are scales, right? They are melodic sequences of notes as well. So we don't even need to go into the subtle differences between scales and modes here. Let's just think of them as the same thing. They're melodic tools. And harmonizing a scale or a mode, again, refers to the fact of making harmony with a melodic tool. So you're combining the notes of the scale, you're packing them together, playing these notes at the same time, the notes of the scale at the same time, and thereby making intervals or chords, triads, tetrads, anything you want using the notes of that scale. Now, of course, you could do this kind of randomly, but harmonizing a scale is typically done following a certain process. Harmonizing scales like this is something that pianists do very intuitively. I've seen many kids in my career, when you teach them a scale, right, the C major scale, all the white notes on the keyboard, it's very intuitive, and it doesn't take long before they start kind of playing 2 or 3 notes at the same time of these notes. They know those notes are the right notes in this context, and so they're like, oh, what if I play these 2 at the same time, or these 2, or these 2? They're harmonizing the C major scale. Why don't we intuitively do this on the guitar? Well, because again, the guitar fretboard is a, pardon my French, shit show. There's so many things happening that it's hard to see the notes everywhere on the fretboard, and thereby it's hard to kind of start combining them. But you could think of it, again, when you're harmonizing a scale on the guitar, would be like seeing, for example, the C major scale on each string and starting to play this scale on 2 strings at the same time. So for example, on the high E string, the C major scale would go, you've got E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, right? And then on the B string, that scale goes B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. So I could play these 2 strings at the same time and play the scale like this, for example. I just harmonized the C major scale. And then I could think, okay, well then on the G string, my scale goes like this. I've got G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now I could play these 3 strings at the same time. So again, see, not as intuitive on the guitar as it would be on the piano. Again, because most of the time people don't really know their notes. And then when you do know your notes, it's still very hard to see all those notes at once and to think of every string and the scale on every string takes a lot of practice. So much so that doing what I just did over here is usually the end result of studying a bunch of things that we're going to talk about over here. Not the first thing that you mess with as a guitarist. We find once again this misalignment between theory and the instrument. So what do we do? Like with everything on this channel, we are going to look at the theory first and then see how we can wrap our heads around it and apply it to the fretboard. So what we are going to start with over here is the harmonization of the C major scale. Why the C major scale? Because again, it has no sharps and flats, it's easy, it's a major scale. A lot of the times people are quite familiar with that scale, all right? So again, the C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, right? So it's the most popular major scale, but just like every other major scale, of course, it follows that sequence of whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So how can we harmonize that scale? We are going to harmonize it in the most common chords that we play in music, which are triads. So again, what we're going to do is starting with every note of the C major scale, we're going to make piles of 3 notes, triads, on top of each scale degree. Now we're not just going to use random 3 notes again, we're going to use the most common ways to make triads, which is by piling 2/3 on top of one another. Again, a triad, the most common triads, major and minor, augmented, diminished, etc. When you look at how they're made, you start with the root, you go up a major or minor third, you get to the third of the chord, which will be major or minor, and then you go up another major or minor third, and that will take you to the 5th of the chord, which again, depending on how you're combining your major and minor thirds, could be perfect 5th, a diminished 5th, an augmented 5th. So we're going to take our C major scale and make triads on top of each chord degree. So we'll start with C, and again, what we're going to do is go up a third. So we're going to skip D and go to E. And then from E, which is our third over here, we're going to go up, skip F, and go to G, our 5th relative to C. So we've got our first triad, C, E, G, which is made of the notes of C major. What is this triad? It is a major triad. How do I know this? Well, you have to analyze the triad by looking at the interval again that each note makes with the root. E is a major third above C. You can tell because when you're moving up from C to E, you're going up 2 whole steps, okay? And then E to G is a minor third because when you go from E to G, you're going up 1.5 steps in your scale pattern. And so again, if you go up major third and minor third, you get a major triad, which can also be seen as, again, a root, major third, perfect 5th. So we're going to do this with every scale degree. If you start with D, you would skip E, go to F, D, F. You see there is 1.5 steps between D and F, which means F is a minor third above D. And then F, skip G, go to A. We have our 2 full steps over here, a major third, and what do we know? A minor third plus a major third equals, again, a minor triad. All right, so DFA is a minor triad. Well, let's keep doing this. What if we start with E? E, skip F, we get to G. And here there's 1.5 steps, so EG is a minor third. And then GAB, that's 2 whole steps. Therefore, that's a major third. So we've got a triad, again, that goes minor third, major third. That's a minor triad. So far, on the first scale degree, we've got a major triad, and then a minor triad, and another minor triad. Scale degree number 4, F. So F, skip G, A. FA is a major third because, again, you can see there's 2 whole steps there. FA, and then A, skip B, C. That's a minor third. So we've got major third, minor third. FAC is a major triad. G, we go G, B, D. G to B, GAB, 2 whole steps, that's a major third. And then B, C, D, minor third. So again, we've got a major triad here, a G major triad. A, C, E. A, skip B, C, that's 1.5 steps, so it's a minor third. And then C, D, E, major third. So we've got an A minor triad over here on the 6th degree. And finally, the tricky one, when you start with B, B, C, D, that's 1.5 steps, so we've got a minor third. D, E, F, so that's another minor third. So the triad on that last degree, B over here, is not major or minor. It's a pile of 2 minor thirds, which makes it a diminished triad. Okay, so let's step back over here. That means that if I take my C major scale, which is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, following whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and I make triads on each scale degree, I get the following sequence of triads. Major, right, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. And again, all these chords are made with the notes of C major following a specific logic. So this is what we call the diatonic harmonization of the C major scale in triads. Why do we say diatonic over here? To really emphasize the fact that, again, the chords we get there are made of the notes of C major. You could imagine, for example, harmonizing the C major scale, and on top of each note of the scale, just making a major triad each time. So you go C major, D major, E major, all major chords. But the thing is that when you do this, what do you realize? For example, a D major is made of the notes D, F sharp, A. So you've got a note here, F sharp, that's not in the scale. So if you did this, it would be a non-diatonic harmonization of the C major scale. You're still making chords with C major following a specific logic, but you're not staying within the C major scale. So remember that piece of vocabulary here because you'll hear it. So now that we know this, we can go ahead and play. We can actually play these chords in any way that you want, by the way. So let's harmonize this scale. We're going to start here with A-shape triads, the full voicing like this. We have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, here I'm getting a little tiny here, B diminished, and C. Now here I wanted to show you the whole sequence going up, but of course once you get up here you could go C major, D, E, F, G, A, go back over here on this area of the fretboard, B diminished, and back over here. I could do this as well, of course, using any other shapes that I want. I could use, for example, E shapes. I could go like this, C major, D minor, E minor, go back here, F, G, A, B diminished. The B diminished is, of course, always a little awkward. That's normal, but you should learn it anyway. Hey everyone, just wanted to briefly interrupt this video to tell you that if you are still watching right now, then I assume that you should hear this. You're obviously part of a percentage of the population that can still stay focused and that understands the value of long form content and of long information like this. So I wanted to let you know that I'm officially launching my Will Metz Guitar Academy. I've been wanting to launch this since I moved to the States about 6 years ago. It was my dream initially to create an environment like this where guitarists, not necessarily professionals, but actually hobbyists, people that have jobs, families, etc., but really want to learn the whole story behind the guitar and music theory and get proper information and education while still fitting their schedule. It's something that I'm passionate about. I have a lot of engineer friends, people that have careers, etc., that used to play with me when I was in college. I was supposed to be an engineer, and now I know they like to know that they can have access to resources like this when they decide to get more serious about the instrument again, even if they want to just play for themselves or with their friends or just for the passion of the instrument and of everything it has to offer. So many things you can do, so many ways you can make the guitar fit into your life, even if you're not a professional guitarist and you chose another career. So the Will Metz Guitar Academy is exactly this. It's gonna be a platform, a community, and also, of course, a place of education where I will have my whole online course, an evergreen, high-quality video series where I'll explain everything about theory. Again, similar to those YouTube videos, but with much more content, more dissected exercises, etc. More importantly, I will be following the people in the academy. I'll be there to answer questions, to make sure everyone understands everything that they want to learn about the guitar music theory so they can reach their goals. So again, if you're interested, you'll see a link down there where you can join the wait list for the first enrollments in the academy. I had a beta launch recently and it is full, so now I'm starting a wait list for the next launch after that beta launch. probably be maybe late summer of 2024 this year or early fall. So if you're interested, click the link and join that waitlist. I'll let you know when spots open up and when I'm actually ready to enroll and start enrolling people for this next phase right after the beta launch. So interested in the Will Metz Academy, interested in learning about guitar music theory for real, getting all the right information, and you know that I am very careful about the way I communicate things, please click the link, and I really hope to see you in this community, in the Academy. All right, let's get back to the video. By the way, I will attach a document on diminished and augmented triads. I didn't cover them in the cage system video, so you'll see them attached over here. You can download the document. Again, all it takes is to click on the link, enter your email, and then I will send you all these documents directly in one email. You'll get the list of all the documents, exercises, and stuff associated with this video. So what are other ways that we could harmonize this scale? We could also do it using trimmed down triads. So rather than playing these big voicings over here to harmonize my scale, I could use smaller voicings and go, for example, C major, D minor, E minor, F, G, A. And then I could do this with every inversion. So I could go, for example, using first inversions here, F, or second inversions, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished. Again, if you don't know what these little trimmed down triads are, go back and check out the video on trimmed down triads. Okay? We'll get into more structured exercise that you can practice in just a second here. But what I want you to realize here is that we've already made a big discovery. We discovered that to be in C major means that essentially all the chords, or to be more precise, let's say most of the chords that you're going to find in the tune are going to be that of the harmonization of C major. Why did I say most of the chords? Because some tunes will go away from the harmonization of the scale, use other chords that don't belong to this harmonization, right? But when you're doing this, understand that even on that one chord that's not in the C major scale, you will have to switch your framework for improvisation most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. So really, to be in C major, to really properly be in C major and use the C major scale or the C major pentatonic, that means that the chord that you're playing over will be part of the harmonization of C major. Those combinations, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, etc., etc. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that you can generalize this result. Because of course it's not just true of the C major scale. Since all major scales follow the same pattern of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and because it's really that pattern that when you pile up the notes gives you those different chord qualities, that means that every major scale follows that pattern. Every major scale will follow the major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished pattern. And because of this, we can generalize the results. And this is how we notate it. We notate it using a number system that some people call the NASHVILLE system. And what is that number system? It's essentially for each scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Again, what do these scale degrees refer to? They refer to the intervals that each note makes with the tonic. So in a major scale, 1 is your tonic, 2 is your major second, major third, 4 is your perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major 6, major 7. And then we write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the notation for each of these intervals. Okay? So typically when you refer to notes, you will write small Arabic numerals like this. But when you want to refer to chords, to the harmonization of that scale and the chord that corresponds to each scale degree, we are going to use Roman numerals. So we will write Roman 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 6 minor, and 7 diminished. That is the result you need to know perfectly by heart. It's so important. So how can you already over here recognize what scale to use, right? And again, this is not the whole story. We'll see we have other things we need to explore. But one of the things is, of course, to recognize the chords of the harmonization of a scale. If you recognize a few chords that come, say, from the harmonization of D major, chances are you are in the D major scale. Now, the only tricky part over here is that some scales have chords in common. For example, C major has a C major, of course, but it also has a G major and an F major. So, of course, it's going to at least share those chords with the F major and the G major scale. F major will start with an F major, so it's the first chord in F, and it's the fourth chord in C. So how do you know which scale you're in or which key you're in? Well, you have to look again at all the chords together. And luckily, like I said, most pieces of tonal music will have 3 or 4 chords, and so you'll be able, by looking at these 3 or 4 chords, to make a conclusion as to which scale generated these chords, right? Which harmonization they belong to. Let's take a chord progression, for example, and try to analyze it. That chord progression is going to go C, then B flat, then F, and then G minor. What is the key of this tune? So C, so here a bad habit that a lot of guitarists have is they'll think, oh, well, the first chord is C, so it has to be in C major. And of course, it's a trap. It's absolutely not in C major. Because at no point in this process here that I say that you had to look at the first chord. It's all the chords together that kind of paint the picture. So here you look at C, but if you harmonize C major, you realize there's no B flat major and there's no G minor. So you can't be in the key of C. However, if you harmonize F major, you get F major, G minor, A minor, B flat major, C major, D minor, and E diminished. And indeed, the 4 chords we have in our progression are part of the F major scale, the harmonization of F major. Therefore, that tune is in F major. And how would we write it? How would we analyze this? How would we notate this? Well, on top of each chord, you will put the Roman numeral associated with it. So this chord is a 5, 4, 1, 2 chord progression. Okay, so now that you know how to harmonize the major scale, right? Not just one major scale, but any major scale in triads, what should you do from there? How should you practice this? The first exercise I want you to do, which you'll access again if you enter your email, I'll send you that exercise, is to actually complete a table in which you're actually going to harmonize every scale. And the way I presented this table is in fact following the order of sharps and flats. If you don't know what that means, I have a video on the circle of fifth you can watch with this. So essentially, again, this table is going to give you the harmonization of every major scale. It's a good way to practice your major scales, and then again, try to see and start discovering which minor chords are in this scale or major chords are in this scale. You'll start seeing the logic over here, and of course, you'll have kind of a reference over here if you're wondering which key you're in when looking at a chord progression. You can always refer to this table, and that will or should help you figure out which key you're in. In the exercise, you'll also see a few chord progressions, very simple chord progressions, just 4-bar chord progression like the one we just did. And the goal is for you to try to find the key using, like we just did over here, following that example. So essentially, try to make sense of the 4 chords you see and figure out which scale has these 4 chords in its harmonization, which major scale, to be precise, has these 4 chords in its harmonization. This allows you to know what the 1 chord is, and then allows you to analyze the chord progression using the NASHVILLE system and put the number, the Roman numeral associated with each chord degree on top of each chord. This, by the way, is what it means to analyze a tune. And we're actually going to do an analysis a little further over here in this video, a full analysis of a real tune, not just mini chord progressions like this. Now that's for the theory part, but for the fretboard part, what you should really do is start harmonizing your scales. So again, like I did, you're going to start, I recommend harmonizing it with full major or minor chords in their full shapes. So that means using the shapes of the cage system. You can use any shape that you want, right? The E shape, the A shape, those are typically the ones I recommend starting with. So again, we're going to take a metronome, and let's say for the sake of this exercise, we're harmonizing B flat major. So first, think of the harmonization. It goes B flat major, C minor, D minor, E flat major, F major, G minor, A diminished, and back to B flat major. And then you start playing. So again, we'll start with A shapes here. So B flat, C, E flat, F, G, A diminished, and I'll go back down. Let's do the same in E shapes. Let's start with here, B flat major, C minor, D minor, E flat major, F major, G minor, A diminished. You could of course do it in the other shapes, the D shape, the C shape, etc. After this, and even more importantly, I would recommend harmonizing these scales using, again, triads on different sets of 3 strings. So for example, you could use root positions here on strings 1, 2, 3. And you'd have B major, C minor, D minor, E flat major, F major, G minor, A diminished. So same thing with the metronome. Then I would do the same thing using first inversions. So first inversions would start here on B flat, C minor, E flat major, F major, let's go back down here, G minor. You would do the same with second inversion. So here you'd have your first B flat here, then C minor, then D minor, which you can also get down here, E flat, F, G minor, A diminished, and back to B flat. And then you can carry this on and do the same thing on strings 2, 3, 4, so B, G, and D. In this case, again, it's going to be a little bit different. Your root positions will go B flat, C minor, there's a lot of ways over here that you can harmonize, of course, because think of all the combinations. You can do any inversion of those triads, and then you can do these on sets of different sets of 3 strings, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, etc. So again, how do you not get overwhelmed? Follow the progression in the exercise sheet that I'm going to put over here, but it's the following progression again. It's start with big chords, the ones you're most familiar with. Then, so E shape and A shape, again, because we're more familiar with these. Then slowly start doing triads. Start with just root positions on these 3 strings, right? Find your way going up and down. Then you can explore first and second inversions. And then when you're good with this, you can start going on different groups of 3 notes. So this is what I would focus on when practicing this. Now, another way I love to practice my harmonizations is by trying to stay relatively close to my 1 chord. So for example, if I'm in B flat, the 2 1 chords I'm going to usually favor are going to be the A shape and the E shape. And And again, most of the time when you're playing a whole chord progression, you're not just sticking to one shape of the cage system and moving it up and down like this. You're going to use different shapes, leverage different shapes, and try to stay roughly in the same area. So in this case, your goal is to harmonize the scale around this one chord over here in the E shape, and you would do the same with the A shape. So for example, you would have the one here, B flat major. C minor is closest over here. D minor you can get over here, but there's actually a closer one right there. D minor in the A shape. Your 4 chord over here right above the 1 chord in the A shape. E flat major. F major right there. So again, fairly close to this chord. For the minor 6 chord, you can get it over here, or you can get it down there. It's also relatively close to this 1 chord. And if you are willing to play D shapes, you also have a 6 chord right there. And then finally, the 7 chord. If you're going to play it, you can get, again, a half step before the 1. So that's really easy, because the 7, again, is only a half step before. So there it is. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or again in the D shape, 6, and then 7. That allows you to access every chord degree close to your 1 chord in the shape that you're most likely to be playing it. And you would do the same thing again with your 1 chord being aimed as a A shape over here. So for example, in D major, that's my 1 chord. Okay, my 2 chord would be E minor over here. My 3 chord would be, you can get it several ways. You can get it right there, F sharp, or in the D shape. The 4 chord is going to be here, G major. 5 chord, A major. My 6 chord over here, and again, I'm still seeing this area around that D major chord. And then the 7 will be the C sharp diminished over here. And back to the 1. Again, how am I obtaining these chords? Well, I harmonize D major, E minor, F sharp minor. And then I think, okay, I want to play all these chords as close as possible to this D over here, this D major in this A shape. So where is E minor? The closest one is not this one, not this one, right? I think of my cage system. No, the closest one is this one. For F sharp, that's the closest one, etc. G. And of course, sometimes there's 2 options, but the goal is to harmonize the scale locally around your 1 shape. Now, we can harmonize any scale that we want using that same process. And one of the scales that makes sense to start harmonizing, of course, is the minor scale. The minor scale is definitely, again, shares the first place on the podium as far as the most common scales you're going to be using with the major scale. So we need to harmonize that scale. Let's say we want to harmonize the A minor scale. Again, we're going to use a scale as an example, and we're going to use one that has no sharps and flats. The most common one, A minor, because it's going to make it simpler for us to, again, do our first harmonization, and then we'll generalize it. The process is the same. We're going to make triads on each note. So A, I start with A, skip B, C, and then skip D, E. A, C, E. That's an A minor chord. B, D, F. That's a B diminished chord. C, E, G. That's a C major chord. And here I'm going to stop for a second because you might be able to see where this is going. Because every major scale has a relative minor scale that essentially has that same sequence of whole steps and half steps, but starting on a different spot, that means that when you harmonize a minor scale, you're of course going to have the same sequence of chords as its relative major scale, but just starting, again, on a different spot. When you're in A minor, your new 1, your main reference note, your center is now A, so you're going to start your sequence with A, but still, it's the same notes as C major. So we're going to find the same chords, but starting with A minor instead of C major. So we'll have A minor, B diminished, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major. The same chords as in the major scale. Now this can also be generalized, of course, and that means that every minor scale will be harmonized following the same sequence of note. And how are we going to notate this with the NASHVILLE system, or with the number system? Well, we have to go back again to the intervals in the minor scale. In the minor scale, when you follow that melodic path, the intervals that each note makes with the tonic is, so you have your tonic, major second, the minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, minor seven, and back to the tonic. So this gives us this sequence of intervals, right? 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, which again, these are the notations for those intervals I just referred to. Now when we make the harmonized scale, again, we're going to replace all these numbers with the Roman numeral version of them, and we'll have our Roman 1 minor, 2 diminished, flat 3 major. And again, you need to put the flat here because it's essentially, again, it's an interval. We're still talking about a scale degree. We're just putting a Roman numeral to make sure we know we're talking about a chord, not just the note, the flat 3 or the minor third of the scale. So flat 3 major, 4 minor, 5 minor, 6 or flat 6, sorry, major, and flat 7 major. Again, usually it takes a little bit to wrap your head around this, or about that, the notation or the NASHVILLE system. But remember, we're referring to the scale degrees of whichever scale is generating the chord progression. And then when we talk about the chord, we actually put a Roman numeral instead of the regular Arabic number. And this Roman numeral, again, is what refers to the chord. But we leave the flats and the sharps and all these things because we still want to know which scale degree that chord is built on. Again, in a minor scale, there is no major third, so you couldn't put just 3. You need to put flat 3. It's built upon the minor third of the scale. So here's the same thing. You could practice harmonizing all the minor scales, and then you would want to do the same thing on your fretboard. But again, you're going to realize that you're playing the same sequence of chords as the relative major scale, just starting on a different spot. Your emphasis is different. And this brings us to a question. If a major scale, like the C major scale, has the same bank of chords as a relative minor scale, how do we know if we're in C major or in A minor? That is the whole point of this video, is how do I know what to play? C major or A minor? Now, of course, at the end of the day, these two scales are relative, so you're going to be playing the same notes, but it's important to know what context you're in. What's the center? Because the only thing that's going to make the difference between whether or not you're in C major or in A minor is which chord is at the center of the chord progression. Which chord is emphasized? What's the star of the movie? So let's take an example over here. Let's say we have this chord progression that goes F, G, D minor, E minor. You realize that all these chords are part of the harmonization of C major. So, are we in C major? Well, the answer is no. It's a trick question. We're not in C major because there is no C major in the chord progression. That goes against the fact that to be in C major, it's not just about having random chords of the harmonization of the scale. They need to be chosen in a way that C major is at least part of the chord progression, at least. There's other things. But you understand that you can't have a tune where C major is the whole center and not even have that chord show up once in the chord progression. So an extra rule over here is that to be in C major, of course you need to use the chords of the harmonization of C. But C needs to be present. And it needs to be present in the chord progression relatively often, so that the other chords you're playing again can be heard as part of a unit, a progression, in relationship to C. And C will always be kind of emphasized in strategic places of this chord progression. We can't go into detail over here in this video because I really wanted to focus on the concept of harmonization. But what we'll see is that it's not just about, again, choosing the chords of the harmonization. It's where the one chord is played and how these chords are kind of put together in order to bring that one chord into the spotlight, to emphasize C major. But one way you can already kind of develop an intuition for this, one way that you can already kind of make educated guesses on which key you're in, again, if you have this ambivalence, for example, if you don't know if you're in C major and A minor, is look at the roll of each chord. Does it sound like C major is the resolving chord? If you were to stop your chord progression and finish the tune, would you stop on a nice long C major or A minor chord? That's going to tell you that basically the way that chord progression is felt is more in relation to C as the home chord or A minor as the home chord. And of course there are more complicated things that I would not be able to explain in this video over here without taking 3 hours of your time. So for now, just think of it this way again. To be in C major means that I'm using the chords of the harmonization of C major to make my chord progression. But that's also true of any tune that's in A minor, the relative minor. You're going to find similar chords. So what's going to put you in one or the other is the emphasis put on either C or A minor. If you have both chords, which happens, you need to ask yourself, does it sound like C is the finishing chord, the home chord, or does it sound like A minor is the finishing chord or the home chord? And that will determine how the tune is heard and perceived and what you will decide your actual key is, C major or A minor. So to finish this video, now that you know that what the harmonization of a scale is, now that you know also the harmonization of the major and the minor scale, which you should, by the way, know perfectly by heart, and how this relates to understanding the logic behind a chord progression and to know what you can play in a given chord progression, let's take a real life example. This tune here is Across the Universe by the Beatles. And let's try to see if we can look at this chord progression and analyze it in a way that makes sense. Okay? So you'll notice the first thing you need to do is try to make a guess as to which key you're in. Now, with some experience, again, you'll know the harmonization of each scale, and you'll be able to kind of at a first glance see what key you're in. Now, the thing I like to look at is usually the first bar of a chord progression and then the last few bars of the chord progression and kind of make a comparison over here, because usually if there's a chord that repeats at the beginning and at the end, it's likely to be the one chord, but it's not always true. So again, you have to make a guess and then see if the rest of the chord progression makes sense in light of that guess. So here I see the first chord is D major, and I also see that at the very end of this tune there is also a D major, right? Not only on the last bar where there's this D major that repeats 8 times, that's a good indication, again we're emphasizing this chord, but then even the bar before that is also a D major. So I'm willing to bet that we're in D major over here at this point. Then you look at the rest of the chord progression and you see, well, there's a lot of D majors, so that's also a good sign. So what are we going to do? We're going to harmonize our D major scale. D major is D major, E minor, F sharp minor, G major, A major, B minor, and C sharp diminished. So I have my harmonization. I can put my numbers over here on top of each chord. And now I'm going to see if it makes sense when I look at the chord progression. What do I see? I see a D major, so that would be the 1 chord. An F sharp minor, that would be the 3 chord. So far so good. A, that's the 5 chord. Then we've got again the 1. B minor, that's also good. It's the 6 chord. F sharp minor, back to the 3. E minor is the 2 chord. I mean, at that point, you can start to see that you've probably made the right choice. So now you keep analyzing, and you have A again, that's the 5, E minor, the 2. The only chord here that's weird is that G minor. What is that G minor doing here? That's not in the D major scale. So the question is, does that mean I need to question my whole analysis? And the answer is no, because when you look at all the other chords, they all fit in the key of D major, but with that one chord. And this has to do with, again, the fact that in reality, not all chords are going to be part of the harmonization of the key or the scale that you're in. Music is not made rationally like this. And apparently, of course, that G minor chord sounds good in this spot, even though it's not part of the original key. Now, it's also due to the fact that there is other ways to make chord progressions like this, and there is a logic, by the way, to how this G minor is coming up. It still has a relationship with the key, but it's a little more advanced. What I want you to realize is that apart from that one chord, that G minor, because everything else falls into the key of D major and it's a harmonization, you know that you can basically play D major over the whole tune. The only place you have to be careful is that G minor. And here, if you don't know what to play, remember that what will always save you is arpeggios or not playing. If you have one bar like this and you don't know what's going on, you can hold back, or you can just play a quick little arpeggio of that G minor chord to kind of save the day over here. You could use your ear as well if you have a good ear, but again, that's dangerous if you're having to improvise over this chord progression, you never heard it before, then you kind of have to figure something out before you even getting to that chord. That's the tricky part. Now, how do we know we're not in B minor here, for example? That's the relative minor key. There's only a few B minors and they're kind of hidden. It's like the second half of a bar. That's not what I call an emphasis on B minor. So, of course, D is going to be the winner here. And if you play the chord progression, you'll notice that D definitely is the one you would finish your tune on, right? So once you're done with your analysis, you have to try it out, okay? At the end of the day, you will never know if your guess is right, even though it makes perfect sense on paper, until you actually experiment over the actual music. But the beauty is that it gives you a framework to begin with, something to start with that is not just muddling through your notes, playing a bunch of wrong notes until you finally hit a note, and then you hit another one, and you try to make sure that works, etc. By the time the solo is halfway through, you haven't even figured out what you should be playing. Knowing this allows you to make a guess that is, again, educated, and that will most likely be right. So what I'm going to do is play over this tune. I think I know the tune, but I can't hear it like this off the top of my head. I'm sorry if this makes me somewhat ignorant when it comes to knowing my repertoire and my classics of the Beatles, but I can't picture the sound of this tune right now. So the good news is I'm essentially approaching this tune like I would if I was given this tune, I never played it, and I need to improvise over it. And I'm going to use, guess what? D major. Let's do it. Again, of course, I'm trying to be stylistically appropriate. I'm trying to kind of somewhat follow the chords using maybe specific arpeggios and things like this. But my main framework, the main thing I'm thinking about is D major, D major, D major. And if you know your D major, even the pentatonic scale, which turns out is always even a little bit safer than the major scale, because there are specific notes in the major scale that can clash with itself. Essentially, there is notes we'll see in the D major scale that over specific chords of a tune in D major don't necessarily sound the best. The pentatonic scale does not have that. All the notes are safe to play. So if you don't know, just stick to a D major pentatonic. Use your ear to guide you towards other notes if you hear them or if you know how to, play them and access them. Use arpeggios if you're lost in specific times of the chord progression and if you don't know exactly what to play, for example, in that G minor. But for the rest of the tune, you're good. You can start your solo confidently, right? You can attack that first note, D, and you know it's going to sound good, and then you can go on and elaborate your solo using that D major pentatonic. I mean, it's a huge thing to be able to do as a soloist, an improviser, and a composer. So let's sum up kind of what we saw in this video. We saw that the harmonic context that you find yourself into, essentially the chord or chords that you're playing over when you're trying to make a melody over a chord progression, these chords, this harmonic context is going to determine your options or your main options or most adequate options for creating melodies, whether it's improvising or composing. So the question is, how do I analyze this harmonic context, right? Well, we saw that the first thing you need to do is figure out whether you are in a tonal piece of music, modal piece of music, or in a blues, okay? You can see this by looking again. Is there many chords that switch quickly from one to the next? For example, the one we just did over here in the Beatles. Obviously, right? There is one and if not sometimes two chords per bar. So you're in a tonal context. It's a great indication of this. A modal context would be a vamp, a chord that kind of repeats over and over and over again. Or sometimes there is what we call modal progressions, but this is a topic for another video. And these modal progressions are usually just two chords that kind of balance between each other. They kind of alternate between one another the whole time. So for example, you got C major, D major, C major, D major over and over again. Now, regardless of the context that you're in, you need to understand that the chords will follow a logic. And the chords will be taken from the harmonization of a scale or a mode. So we need to understand what that concept of harmonization is. And that's what we talked about in this video. We started by harmonizing the major scale. We saw that for each major scale, we get a pattern: 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 major, 6 minor, and 7 diminished. And that's true of every major scale, all right? But we also saw that minor scales can be harmonized, and they're going to have the same chords. So how do you know whether you're in major or minor? It's about the emphasis. It's about one chord that stands out as being the home chord. So if there is an ambiguity between major or the relative minor, look for which chord seems the most emphasized, the most prominent. Now realize that, again, you can harmonize any scale, any mode even. And you don't even have to harmonize in triads. You can harmonize using different formulas, but that is the most common formula for harmonization. I also want to, last but not least, explain and again emphasize the fact that most tunes are not just in one key the whole time. A lot of them are, but many tunes will have what we call modulations. So you'll either have what we call a key change. So for example, the tune starts in C major and then goes to a completely different key like G major. Or sometimes you'll have a bit of the piece that's modal and a piece that's tonal. Or you'll have a local modulation. So just 1 or 2 bars that really locally, temporarily take you away from the key, and then you go straight back into it. That's the case in that G minor chord that we saw in the tune we just analyzed, right? There's obviously something that changes over that one chord, and the rest is all D major. So when you get out of the pure exercises over here, you see that in the real world, you really need to be comfortable with all those contexts and recognizing all those contexts. But all this begins with your ability to understand the harmonization of a scale or a mode, to be able to rationally understand it, but also to take it to your fretboard and practice that harmonization by just walking up and down those chords in a given scale or mode. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Again, I hope you learned a lot about the harmonization of scales. I hope this gave you some insights on how chord progressions are made and how that actually determines what you should play over those chord progressions, how you can figure out the scale or the key again, which will allow you to set a framework to play the right notes from the get-go, right? Without having to just muddle through and hopefully find some of the right notes, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, right? This is how it works. This is the real info. This is what the pros use, is this information. So anyways, hope you learned a lot. Again, like I said, I will be launching my Will Metz Guitar Academy really soon. It's a safe place for guitarists to learn all the real stuff that there is to learn about music theory and fretboard navigation. No BS, no gimmicks, no learn this in 5 minutes and you'll know everything. Okay, it's a real music education, so you have to be prepared for this. But it's also a real music education that you can do within a busy life and a normal career, or even a busy career, if you have a passion for the instrument and you want to go you want to get the real information, the information that pros get and that they know, what allows them to have all these tricks, know what to play, know how to just hop into a jam session and miraculously just play the right thing even though they've never played the tune. There's logics behind those things. There is rules. Don't let people on the internet make you believe that there is no rules and it's just talent and things like that. You can learn these things. I've taught hundreds of people how to do these things. So if you're interested, get a spot in the Will Metz Guitar Academy. The beta group is already full, but there will be a link to join the wait list, and I'll hit you up as soon as I'm ready to enroll more people. Again, click the link below, join the Will Metz Academy. I'm super excited about it. It's going to be an incredible experience and opportunity for people that want to get more serious about the guitar, even though they don't necessarily want to make a living out of it. Okay? Click the link. Hope to see you there. And again, thanks for watching. Thank you for your support. I really, really appreciate everyone watching this channel. And I'll keep coming up with free stuff, long format videos, hopefully help as many guitarists as I can. Take care.